Alright, everybody, it's showtime!
It's showtime.
It's showtime.
It's showtime!
It's showtime!
Now take your position. It's showtime.
Hey, heads up, everybody! It's showtime!
Oh, it's time!
This is the Stand and Deliver Comedy Podcast with Rhodders.
Hello and welcome to the Stand and Deliver Comedy Podcast, episode 6. My name is Rhodders, I'm a stand-up comedian, but more importantly, I'm the promoter of the Stand and Deliver Comedy Club in Reading, up above Smoking Billy's. Right in the heart of Reading, in fact, we have a coveted RG1 postcode. If you haven't listened to this podcast before, where have you been? Although I probably shouldn't berate you for only just joining now, 6 episodes in. I had a lecturer at university that used to do that. He'd waste half a lecture moaning about the people who hadn't turned up, and I was just thinking, well, I'm here, can you just get on with the lecture, please? And don't worry, I'm not going to give a lecture. I'm going to deliver to you a podcast. So it's basically me having a chat with some of the most interesting acts who have passed through the doors at the Stand and Deliver Comedy Club. We have a really interesting interview this time around. I mean, we never get boring guests on, because that would be stupid, wouldn't it? I mean, I choose who to have on the show. Why would I inflict a boring conversation on myself, let alone you, the listeners? But this one is particularly interesting. Our guest today is Robert White, an incredibly original and very funny musical act. I don't think you can compare him to any other comedian on the circuit at the moment. And he played the Stand and Deliver Comedy Club. He headlined our room back in June of 2017. And, well, if you weren't at that show, then you might have seen Robert White pop up on a programme called Britain's Got Talent. I think comedians have it harder on Britain's Got Talent than many of the other types of act. I mean, I'm probably biased because I am a comedian, but I just think that's the truth. Now, I suppose my justification for saying this is that you've got to do so many things at once. You've got to be able to play to the live audience in the theatre, you've got to be able to play to the judges, and on top of that, you've got to work out how to play to the cameras, which is another skill in itself. And then, something you might not have thought about is that the audience isn't really there for comedy. They're there to see all sorts, and let's face it, a lot of them are just there to see the rubbish contestants get booed off, aren't they? So it's difficult enough for comedians to perform at mixed bill nights where there's bands and stuff. So playing at Britain's Got Talent must be even more difficult. Now, before we get on to our guest, I thought I'd just tell you a little bit about what I've been up to recently. I had the pleasure of performing once again at the Epsom Playhouse. I was performing for Pete K. Malley. I was supporting his Live and Loud tour, where it's a show about his love of rock music. And because of that, he actually brought a real-life rock band with him. They were called the Gingers. They were loud as heck and really pretty damn good. They played about 3 songs, then I was straight up on stage. I sort of owe the Gingers one because they inadvertently saved me when I fluffed up one of my jokes. I mean, it's awful when you stumble right in the middle of a setup and then kind of forget your joke, and you just have to kind of bluff your way through it. And I managed to get my way out of it by drawing attention to the fact that when the rock band were being introduced one by one up onto the stage, the guitarist forgot his guitar and had to scuttle on back into the wings to get his instrument. So I just said, look, if the guitarist can forget his guitar, I think you lot can forgive me for getting one joke. Maybe it's sort of a nice conspiracy where the Gingers messed up deliberately to save me because they knew I was going to mess up even worse. Maybe. So it was interesting because I was opening and I had a 10-minute spot because it was quite a crowded bill, lots of other comics and a band. Not complaining, Pete, thanks for the gig. But often if I'm going on first at that type of show, I'm generally given around 20 minutes because a crowd, there were 80 odd of them there, and they were very nice. But it's a cold room in the fact that no one's been on and warmed them up. And so you ideally need about 20 minutes just to do a bit of crowd work and get them into the show. Whereas if you've only got 10 minutes, I kind of felt I had to do an awful lot in a very short space of time. But that kind of pressure helps you build towards being a better comic. So it was a good experience overall and a fantastic night. I mean, it's really interesting the different places on the bill at a comedy night. Depending whether you're opening or you're on in the middle, you can have a completely different gig. Like, they were a very nice crowd, but if you're on first, you're going to have to work harder. Not that I'm complaining, all these things help you build towards being a better comedian. But sometimes a quiet, polite audience who are just in need of a bit of warming up can be can actually, I think, be more difficult than a rowdy audience that needs the odd heckle put down and a bit of argy-bargy, because then you can just sort of bring the energy up to match them. But then, like, if you're too boisterous before the crowd is ready for it, then you just end up kind of alienating them even more, because if you go on mega high energy and they're still quite low energy, it looks like you're playing a different gig. And so we'll build this weird sense of alienation between you and the audience. And I mean, the aim of comedy is to form a connection and then get a laugh, obviously. I'm telling that more as a note to myself than any comedians that might be listening to this. So that's the warm-up section of the podcast done. Now it's about time we brought on our headliner, so to speak. He is Robert White. If you haven't seen him live, then I suggest you pause the podcast now for just a moment and look up his Britain's Got Talent audition. Just type in Robert White, Britain's Got Talent into YouTube. It's well worth watching because he takes the mick out of the judges in quite a brilliant way. We recorded this chat backstage at Bear Funny in a pub called the Finsbury in Manor House in London. His website describes him as the only gay Aspergic quarter-Welsh comic on the British comedy circuit, but more importantly, I think he's one of the most original and interesting musical acts on the circuit at the moment. Now, you quite often hear people talking about the power of comedy and how it can change lives, etc., but Robert brought up a real-life example of this. Robert talked to me about how performing comedy has actually worked as a sort of cognitive behavioural therapy that's helped him deal with his Asperger's syndrome and relate to people and the world in a much easier way. So a real-life example of comedy changing somebody's life for the better. I think it's a fascinating chat and you're really going to enjoy it. So here is Robert White.
This is the Stand and Deliver Comedy Podcast.
What would you like to know?
So, Jess got off the back of the Britain's Got Talent audition, won the judges over. It was a really exciting thing to watch. But what I want to know is, when you auditioned and went for it, what is your ultimate goal? Is it just to boost your comedy? Is it as straightforward as just boosting your comedy, getting more club bookings?
Well, it's slightly bittersweet in that I was basically, it's hard to say, but I'd given up comedy in September. Edinburgh was very, very hard on me financially. I'd done 13 years of comedy, and I decided that I was going to go full-time into teaching. So this year was going to be finishing off comedy and starting up teaching, and Britain's Got Talent was basically me going, well, if I do this, then at least I can say to my mum, I've gone as far as I can. And, that was done. And what comedy has brought me is teaching. The actual process of doing comedy has helped my Asperger's and enabled me to get a proper normal job.
So you think you doing comedy has changed the way you relate and interact to people?
Of course, yeah. When I first started comedy, I couldn't walk into pubs. Well, if you walk into the pub, you bang your head, ba-bum-cha. No, if I couldn't walk through the doors of pubs into the premises on my own, I had to phone the promoter. I always stood on tubes because I had to. I didn't want to make eye contact with people. My tube journey, for want of a better phrase, my tube journey. So my journey of taking tube journeys, if that's not like tautology, is, first time I got in a tube, sat down, felt really awkward, had to stand up again. Then for a few years, I'd stand and look down at the floor. Then what I'd do is I'd stand and I'd have headphones in, so it looked as if I was listening to music. Then I'd sit holding a paper. Then I'd sit holding a paper, not reading it. Then sometimes I'd sit holding a Polish paper or paper not in English just for the hilarious crack of it to see if anyone spoke to me. Then I'd book it. So that's one step away from making yourself look as if you're, And then now I can sit on a tube seat without needing anything. I can just sit down. Frequently I close my eyes and I'm sort of thinking to myself. But that's sort of like just one example of how doing lots of different complicated and very sort of highly intense social things through comedy, whether it's walking into places I don't know, or travelling to places I don't know, or meeting people I don't know, or walking into rooms with audience dynamics which are hard to gauge. All these different things, like travelling on a tube, all of them have progressed. So not just sort of going from standing to seating on a tube, which I suppose in some ways is the opposite of evolution. But no, so all of these processes have gradually got better. With time, comedy has been like BCT, which is like CBT, but I'm dyslexic, so I got it the wrong way round. Although that was a joke because I deliberately did it. I could go TBC too. I'm not sure what it is. So
I'm also dyslexic, so spelling jokes go over my head as well. So,
all right then. Well, I won't do any magic. Oh, no, that sort of spell. Ba-boom-cha. No, CBT is what they do with kids now, where basically they put them in complicated situations. So, like, if you're a young autistic or Asperger's guy, like in school, they'll go into that shop and buy this. Comedy has been... You say, I think it has improved me. It has phenomenally improved me. You know, I did one of the worst things in comedy, the Gong Show, a few years ago, and won it when it was an awful Hepley audience and you really had to play the room. And this was only 2 years ago, so it was years after I've been, you know, regularly headlining many other gigs. But 2 years ago I won it. And then 11 years ago I walked on stage, started crying and ripped my T-shirt.
And that was real, that wasn't an act, that was all...
That was all, yeah. The whole sort of thing where I start out nervous comes from the fact that when two things, actually. One, I do have mannerisms I can't... If you're autistic, you have sort of... they call it stimming or tics, which, you know, your hands move because you're thinking, and it's the way that something to do with your mind is connected to... Who knows? Anyway... But the nervousness comes from the fact of it's just an easy way to explain that. It's easier to walk on stage and go, ooh, I get nervous, than it is to walk on stage and go, blah-de-blah-de-blah-de-blah-de-blah-de-blah, autistic tics, etc., etc. You know, and a lot of my comedy, when I very first started, I had lots of jokes, and I had people who laughed at jokes. And for a while, I was starting just with jokes without mentioning Asperger's. And then there'd be a situation where every so often the gig... I'd screw up. So I mentioned Asperger's because that at least explained it if I did get confused or if my mind went on a wobbly or something like that. Now, you know, it's sort of like, I said to someone the other day, it's sort of gone in reversal because being so... And people go, oh, you're autistic, you must be a genius at maths, or you must be a genius at this, that, or the other. I'm not a genius at anything, he says. Well, my IQ is, but that's... anyway, no, but I think that's totally coincidental. If there's anything that my mind does work, well... Apart from the obvious, apart from the fact that I only eat onion soup every day and that I've got 300 tank tops and blah-de-blah-de... Yeah, apart from the obvious obsessive and collective things and the fact I taught myself the piano because it was easier to connect with the piano than it was with other kids. If there's one thing that my mind does do hyper-analytically, it's analyse audiences, which... in developing my social skills has assisted me, but then conversely has then meant, touch wood, that I've got a very unique way of analysing audiences that I don't think a lot of comedians do have, and I know that from speaking to other comedians, and I'm telling them about, well, they're saying, well, there's laughter in the room, and I'm going, well, it's the wrong sort of laughter, and they're laughing at the wrong thing, and they're laughing the wrong time, and they're laughing at themselves, or the situation is different, or the only reason they laughed at that joke was because, you know, it's looking... There's so many... And I'm sure there are other comics who do it as well, but I think I do it to a hyper-analytical degree.
So you can spot the patterns in what the audience... in their sort of behaviour. I can spot things in there, and, you know, saying that, someone's going to go, well, why can't you be the perfect and most amazing comedian? Because, well, the reason is because being a comedian takes a whole different... level of skills, and just because I've got one skill It's not a science, is it? You can't do comedy by numbers. Or can you? Can you?
No. Well, this is like what the algorithms for personality and computers and taking over the world is. Once they work it out, if they invent another comedian that's totally computer generated, apart from Jimmy Carr, I don't know. Anyway, I think he must be able to. Because if the mind is just a combination of yeses and nos, just like on a phenomenal level...
You'd have to map it. It'd probably be easier just to learn to do comedy a conventional way, wouldn't it? It'd be, be very complicated.
Technology massively in the future.
So when you're talking about analysing an audience, do you then start to do that in social situations? When you met strangers or had to talk to people, did you kind of treat it like a mini gig, so you'd then be able to gauge their response better, or
it's
or
not that direct a connection, but it is that sort of thing. I think gradually an understanding of all the social aspects of doing comedy, whether it's writing to promoters or whether it's talking to promoters, or whether it's buying presents for promoters, or whether it's having to go to bed with the promoter. No, if talking to audiences after the gig.
So was it because you had a goal, which was doing comedy, that then put a context to things which helped you do it because there was more point, rather than if you were just, like you were saying in that cognitive behavioural therapy exercise, if you're just arbitrarily sent to a shop, whereas like if you have to go to a shop because you need to buy a prop to go do your gig and then you need to email a promoter, does a context make it easier to sort?
Three things. One, for all Asperger's people, context makes it better. That's why you can't do small talk as much. If you're just standing in a room and you don't know what you're speaking about, then where's the context? Whereas if you're working in a shop and you know your job is to serve someone, that's a context which could give you a connection to a person. But the two other things are, it wasn't sort of the aim of doing comedy. Comedy wasn't the ultimate aim. The fact was that jobs kept on getting lost. So the ultimate aim was, and still is, to be financially secure and not struggle. And comedy looked as if it was at one time, and possibly still is, jury's out, the most reasonable path towards that goal. And thirdly, you say when it's out of context, like just going into a shop, and I'm sure for the kids who do it, and there was an element to, even without doing any of this, when I was 20 and I was first told, look, you've got Asperger's, and I was told totally abstractly, this is how your mind works, without any therapy or anything, just like the information that this is it, that itself was enough of a relief. It closed so many doors and it opened so many opportunities for me, just the knowledge itself. So, yes, of course, doing the therapy, doing the therapy does a lot of the grunt work based on your understanding of yourself. But when you gain an understanding of yourself, whatever it is, if you get to 17 and you go, oh, I'm gay now, or if you've been struggling with writing and someone goes, look, you're dyslexic, you're not it's not you, or if you've been, I don't know, always really taken by leek and potato pie and daffodils, and then someone goes, oh, well, you're a quarter-Welsh.
So when you said it's about sort of...
So it's like an answer. It's an answer. That's it. It's an answer.
So you learn more a lot about yourself by doing comedy, and then when you're on stage, are you an exaggerated version of yourself? Is it in any way... Because I notice you wear slightly different clothes, you put on a different top when you go on and perform. Are you amping up the what's already there, or what are you doing?
The clothes thing, basically, when I first started comedy, there's two things have happened. I've become more relaxed in my real life, and I've also changed in my comedy life. So when I first started comedy, in my real life, I only wore blue. I only ever wore blue because I liked blue. So all my clothes, everything I had was blue. Gradually, I've become much more free in my fashion sense. So as I've become less reliant on certain, crutches and things, due to increasing my social ability. Also, my clothes have changed. The clothes initially were clothes for stage, were clothes that I wanted to wear in real life, but I felt I don't want to wear this out because I don't want people to look at me as if I'm trying to be something. Whereas you can wear whatever I love sort of bright colours and wacky trousers and stuff, and you can wear that on stage, and that's the place to be. And also, for me, if you start nervous, and I had to sort of start nervous because of my mannerisms, if you look slightly nervous, then you look real nervous. Whereas if you look like a characterisation of yourself when you start, then that's a sort of like a theatrical mannerism.
So you're more in control of that.
You're more in control of that. It's because jokes need angles to play off. If you're a slightly thinning, bald man who always does a joke about being bald, and after 6 weeks your hair's sort of like grown slightly over, and then you do the same joke about being bald, it's not going to get the same response.
It's lost
its authenticity. So paradoxically, by being a slight sort of concise version of myself, I then gain greater authenticity, in the same way as sometimes the truth can be told through a fiction better than the truth itself.
So with the audition,
yes,
because you very obviously you tailored the set to mock the judges.
Yeah.
Was it difficult tailoring your set? Because you even mentioned in the audition that usually I swear in clubs, and when you played my club, you were very blue. Was it hard to adapt the set?
The thing that comedy has brought me is it's brought me to be a lot more free with my comedy and with what I say. And when I first started comedy, the great thing about doing comedy is because my socialisation means that all my sort of interaction with people outside of the stage are thought through. It means that's very, very tiring. Every day I'm going, what's this person thinking? What's that person doing? What's that facial expression mean? Everything I do, everything that you have as intuitive, to me is thought through. Therefore, walking on stage, saying whatever I like, is very freeing. As I developed my ability to understand myself and socialise, also I developed my ability to not have to be like that. And where I've done quite a few shows where I've geared my material to different things and taken out swearing, taken out crudeness. And when I was first doing comedy, I thought, this is all part of me, this has to be me. But then I sat down and I thought, well, if I take out crudeness, if I take out swearing, I've still got silliness, I've still got quirkiness, I've still got the subjects I talk about, I've still got jokes, I've still got puns, I've still got music. There's so much left. When I take out that stuff, it's not actually integral.
So you don't think at all that doing TV and having to constrict to that will at all... Because if somebody saw you on TV,
yeah,
and then they saw you are doing a rowdy Saturday night gig where it's totally appropriate to do rude songs, and
yeah,
that's what the audience want. If someone's seen you on TV and they think, oh, it's that nice person who sung about windows and the judges,
yeah,
do you think there's like a conflict there and you run the risk of losing anything or not?
Well, I think that's the same for any comic. Because any comic can say one thing on TV and then different off TV. You've just got to gear what you do. So if I was to do, say, like a solo hour Edinburgh show at 6 in the afternoon, where most of the people have come and seen me from, seeing me on TV, then I've got to, I'll do what's appropriate for there. And if I'm doing like a corporate gig for like a business, I may do stuff which is even cleaner than TV. And if I do like a Saturday night rowdy gig, I might start off and see what's happening, see what other people are doing, see how far I can go. And I think that's the same for any comic. I've seen lots of comics from TV live, and they say things which you wouldn't say on TV because it's TV. I'm a primary school teacher. I don't stand up in a primary school. I sometimes, to teach, improvise little songs about the subjects and about the class. and about their answers they've given. I'm not going to, swear and curse and everything with, horses for courses.
Was it more nerve-wracking or not? Did you feel more pressure just because there's TV cameras? Is it chaotic backstage, and does that wind you up?
It's chaotic and it's random, and I had other things to think about because I actually had lost my voice on the day, so I was very worried that I couldn't actually speak. But if to be absolutely honest, because I was in the mindset of, well, I've given up comedy, in a way I had nothing to lose. I just thought I'd just do it and see what happens. Now I've sort of got something to lose, which means it's a bit different. I'm coming from a different angle, so we'll see what happens.
When the judges said yes, and basically the room was totally on your side, were you surprised by that?
It's a very odd situation, and I think I was surprised by that. Because people look from the outside and go, well, you did well, you must have done well, but we all know, we've done gigs, tryout spots for clubs, and you storm the tryout spot, and then you get the answer, no, I don't want to book you, and it's incomprehensible. So it was lovely, it was brilliant. I'm in the best thing on TV. I know it's got such a wide viewership, and the kids where I teach, they think I'm an utter legend. So when those 4 yeses came, David, Alicia, Amanda, Simon, it was so brilliant. It was amazing. It was sort of proof. It was proof that I went on there to get an answer, and they gave me an answer.
Excellent.
You're good, yeah.
Awesome. Robert White, thank you very much. Where can people find more about you?
Well, I'm on a little programme called Britain's Got Talent. Other than that, I've got a website, which is www.robertwhitecomedy.com. I've got Twitter, which is @RobertWhiteJoke. I've got Instagram, which is @RobertWhiteJoke. And other than that, most Tuesday mornings, I'm in a little cafe in Bethnal Green. If people want to line up outside and buy me a donut.
Excellent, thank you.
This is the Stand and Deliver Comedy Podcast with Rhodders.
That was Robert White. Now, he's an act that doesn't appear on a huge number of podcasts, so thanks very much, Robert, for taking the time. There's some really, really interesting stuff in that interview, and best of luck with Britain's Got Talent. We'll all be watching and rooting for you. And now it's time for the part of the show, I'm just going to have to call it Rhodders bangs on about himself and does some shameless self-promotion, but hopefully there'll be some amusement value to it. I like to be very selfless when talking to the guests, because they've done a lot more than me, they're a lot more interesting than me, so I just like to try and ask the right questions and let them talk. But the beginning and the end of the podcast, I mean, it's mine, isn't it? So I can do what I want. But I got to do something really interesting that I've been bursting to tell people about, but I've only just been allowed. I voiced the main character of a computer game. It's called Beast Quest, manufactured by a company called Maximum Games. It's available on Xbox, PlayStation, and PC. I got to play the part of Tom, a young adventurer battling evil monsters and freeing the beasts from an evil wizard. Every now and again I do the old voiceover for an advert or a radio station jingle or something, but I've never done something this big before. Like, the script was absolutely massive. But one of the weirdest things about it, and maybe this is just obvious to you if you play a lot of computer games, but what I didn't realise is that when you have a character in a computer game and you make him jump and things like that, he often makes a noise, normally a sort of grunting noise. Someone has actually sat in a booth and made those noises for like half an hour at a time. So a lot of I had a lot of dialogue to record, but a lot of the recording session was me just sitting there in a booth going, just making silly noises. What a great thing to do. But it looks like a really fun game, so if you're into your fantasy, why not check it out? And here is a short clip of me in the game. Obviously, I'm the only bloke talking in this exchange.
All I remember is hearing the screech of a bird. And then the fire started.
Screech of a bird?
Not like a normal bird. It sounded angry, like it was hunting.
I'm going to make sure what happened to your village doesn't happen to anyone else.
If you're going to...
Indeed I am. Don't get in my way, I've got a sword and magic armour and everything. So if you're interested in that, there's an article on the blog section of my website, Rhodders.com, spelled RH, so you can check out the game, and a clip of me saying some more stuff for a CGI character. Right, at the beginning of this podcast, I told you about one of my comedic high points, getting to play a sold-out Epsom Playhouse, and I think it's only fair, in the name of balance, and to keep my ego in check, to tell you one of my recent comedic lows. And this is the bizarre thing about comedy, anything can happen, pretty much, and I went from a sold-out theatre to a gig in London where the absolute opposite was happening. The gig will remain nameless, but we got the grand total of one member of the audience. And I've played to 4 people, I think that's the least, but I've never ever played to 1 before. A lot of the acts went, oh, sod this, I'm going to go home. Because they were London acts and they thought, well, I'm only 3 tube stops away, so I might as well just have an early night. But yeah, I've paid for a travel card to come and do this open spot. So I thought to myself, I am a great believer in the show must go on, and so we sort of held this gentleman hostage, and 3 of us performed 5 minutes of material to him. And you know what? Mark, his name was. He was really nice. It was very nice of him to do that. And afterwards, he told us an inspirational story in which he said that his friend used to be a comedian just as Al Murray was becoming famous, and he went to a gig and his friend was playing and Al Murray was playing, and there were only about 6 in attendance, and his friend kind of went on, half-arsed it a bit, didn't really engage, got off as soon as he could, whereas Al Murray went on there and he played that room like he was playing live at the Apollo, giving those 6 people who did turn up a heck of a show. Now, I think I have no way of verifying the truth of this, but I don't think it really matters because there's a really nice message behind this. I mean, it's not just me being tight and moaning about a travel card to London, although it is partly that. But I really think if you're there and that person wants to hear the show, you might as well do it. What else are you going to do? Sure, it might feel a bit awkward just performing to one person, but just get on with it. You haven't got anything else to do as you've travelled there. So yeah, I thought that was quite an inspiring little moment. And the night could have been an awful lot worse, to be honest. I had my mate Carl Richards, another Reading comic, with me to keep me company, which always makes these kind of disasters more bearable because you have somebody to laugh about it with. And I can't really complain because this kind of thing hasn't happened to me for quite a while. So in many ways, I've been very, very fortunate. Although if it happens this week, I will have a tantrum. Right then, it's probably about time I brought this podcast to a close, because if I go on for too long, the internet will run out of megabytes. At least, I mean, that's how I'm told it works. I better tell you about what's coming up at my comedy club, the Stand and Deliver Comedy Club, up above Smoking Billy's in Reading. The next show is the 10th of May, and our headliner is Mo Omar. He played the gig last year, and in between the last time he played by night, he has been signed to Off the Curb, who is Comedy Central's live comedy division, and he's very, very interesting and of course extremely funny. Somali born, Cardiff raised, London based. He's got a very unique sort of way of looking at the world, and he was also the winner of the Leicester Square New Comedian of the Year 2017. The host is Ryan Dalton. He's quick-witted and has travelled all across the world, including Australia, and gigged alongside the likes of Paul Foot, Sarah Pascoe and Joel Dommett. And we have a whole range of support acts, including Oxford's own Chelsea Birkby. She talks about all sorts of subjects, everything from nightclubs to mental health, dealt with in a really funny and sensitive way. So for tickets, just go to facebook.com/Stand and Deliver Comedy Night. Hit the big blue book now button at the top right of the page. So I'm going to tell you a few highlights from my own gig diary. On the 6th of May, I'm performing at Angel Comedy at the Camden Head. It's the Say You Think You're Funny competition. And on the 28th of June, I'm at Joke in the Box at the Lightbox Theatre in Woking. More gigs will be added, and there'll probably be a few more by the time I've uploaded this podcast. So just go to Rhodders.com, RHODDERS, and just click the gigs button. Right, that's pretty much it. One more thing. If you could all do me a massive favour, write me a review of this podcast on iTunes, because this really is a very small DIY enterprise. I haven't got an army of producers running around bringing me cups cups of coffee and doing all the work for me. I'm actually recording this in my bedroom right now. So every little thing you do, iTunes reviews, gets more ears on the podcast. If you don't use iTunes, then why not post about it on your Facebook, share the latest episode and tell all your mates about it. So that's all I got for this show. Hope you've enjoyed it. This is Rhodders signing out for the Stand and Deliver